Almost as bold as Game Freak's decision to focus on the story in Pokémon Black and White was their decision to make a direct sequel to these games, Pokémon Black 2 and Pokémon White 2. While Pokémon Gold and Silver were technically sequels to Pokémon Red and Blue, these games, as the title suggests, were a lot more honest and upfront about this sequel status. Black and White 2 and Gold and Silver both take place 2 years after their respective first titles, and they also have another parallel. The respective villainous team returns for a second time. Now, if you watch my video on Team Rocket and Johto, you would know that I feel like they let us down a little bit, especially in comparison to Team Rocket and Kanto. But I'll tell you right now that Black 2 and White 2 deliver what I believe Team Rocket and Johto were supposed to be. Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 gave us a villainous team that fell from grace, a villainous team that lost their king, a team that were hungry for vengeance, a team that had nothing to lose. They gave us Team Plasma. Now, this Team Plasma isn't quite the same one that came in the first game. It actually formed after the events of the first games. And if you want to watch a video on that Team Plasma, you can click in the top right corner up here and it'll take you there. So after the events of Pokemon Black and White, Team Plasma split into two groups really. All of the ideologues and those who really cared about Pokemon split off into the old Team Plasma, former Team Plasma, and they sort of run a shelter in Driftvale that takes care of Pokemon. On the other hand, you have what's left of Team Plasma. And if you watch my last video, you know if there's no more ideologues, if there's no more loyalists, you just have opportunists. This new Team Plasma is spearheaded by Ghetsis, who runs it just like the last time, but the leaders underneath is just one of the 7 sages, Zinzolin, and a new member, Colress. Now, it's pretty obvious if you've played through Pokemon Black and White why N wouldn't return as the king, but not only that, the current members of Team Plasma see him as a traitor. Now, while N was the shining character in the last games, he is missing, but don't let that scare you off because in this game, there's a lot of great character moments even in his absence. What defines this new Team Plasma is that Pokemon Liberation is nothing but a footnote now. Sometimes it'll be talked about in passing, but this new Team Plasma has nothing left to hide. And as I alluded to earlier, this team really encapsulates the feral, cornered animal that I expected from Team Rocket and Johto. They were missing Giovanni, and I expected more of a spiral into terrorism and villainy. And while you didn't get a ton of that in Johto, in Unova, right now, you'll see a lot of it. Now, again, I've talked about these videos already, but this is the 6th episode in my series covering the many villainous teams of Pokemon. If you want to see that playlist, you can click up in the top right corner. And these are all just videos that serve as deep dives into each of the villainous teams of Pokemon, as well as a rating and review. I judge each team on 4 metrics and place them on my villainous teams tier list, so stay tuned for that. So let's get on with the deep dive. Now, your first encounter with Team Plasma in these games is a lot more conventional than your first encounter with them in the first games. Your first few encounters with them, rather than a grand speech given by Ghetsis, is just you taking down some grunts carrying out some petty low-level crimes. In Flokessi Ranch, you stop a grunt from capturing one of the rancher's herdiers, and he sort of gives off some tired mantra about Pokemon Liberation. So it shows that while there might be some few stragglers who are hanging on to the ideology, it's kind of going away now. In fact, in Burbank City, we discover that the grunts talk about N as a traitor. N, who was the beloved king of Team Plasma in the last games, who was the arbiter of this Pokemon Liberation ideology, is now nothing more than a traitor, cementing this rejection of the ideology. And when we stop some thieves in the sewers of Castelia, they don't even push back on the idea that they're just Pokemon thieves now. Now, this is a stark contrast from Team Plasma in the first game, because while the grunts in those games would strongly, or it seemed like they strongly believed in the liberation ideology and would use it to justify their behaviors, it seems like these ones don't really comprehend the ideology at all. In fact, they see Pokemon Liberation as nothing more than a buzzword to excuse their crimes. This game, in my opinion, touches on something a lot more deep than what you may initially perceive. I, for example, didn't think these games offered as much as the first games when it came to plot and themes, But I come to realize I was wrong about that. It offers a lot more than what you may think. While Pokémon Black and White, in a very Machiavellian manner, describe how rhetoric and power shape the world around us, Pokémon Black and White 2, while holding on to some of that with Ghetsis, touch on what happens to revolutionary and activist groups when they lose focus, when certain groups lose their ideology, lose sight of it, whether it's the loss of a leader or just scope creep. What you get is a shell of that former team. What was once a loyal group of the Philosopher King N and his loyal 7 sages is now nothing more than a group of loosely bound together thugs, opportunists, and cynics. Now, I also believe this is more realistic as well, as a lot of groups we see in the real world are not made up of ideologues and zealots. In fact, they're made up of many different groups, many different ideas and people bound by maybe one unified cause while having their own ulterior motives. This idea is most emphasized by the 3 current leaders of Team Plasma, but we'll get into the specifics there as the story unfolds. Now, one of these leaders we meet is Colress, who we also find in the Castelia sewer. Now, Colress isn't some grand philosopher who's married to an ideology like N. Quite the contrary, he is almost some sort of cynic who doesn't really care about ideology or morals and is only focused on his own goal. He doesn't wield the revolutionary power of Team Plasma like N did to shape this new world into what he believes is the most ideologically correct or philosophically correct. He uses the revolutionary power of Team Plasma to research how he can bring out the true, fullest potential in people and Pokemon. When he talks to you, he hints at there being other means to bringing out the power of Pokemon than just the bonds of friendship like we always hear, which does come off as a little sinister. Now, we don't know that Colress is the leader of Team Plasma, besides the fact that he has the exact same color palette as Team Plasma, but that's besides the point. He shows us how to move Crustle in the way of the road, which shows that he's very technologically advanced and has found ways to manipulate Pokemon already, which is sort of a prelude to what we'll see at the climax. Our next encounter with Team Plasma is in Nimbasa City, and this is where Hugh, the rival character, really gets his first character moment. Now, I'm saving a lot of what he says for his own video, but needless to say, it adds a little emotional depth to the story for those who may not have played Pokemon Black and White 1. Essentially, Team Plasma stole his sister's Purloin in the past, and he is seeking revenge for that and wants to get it back, of course. I think the subplot's compelling at times, overdone at other times, but regardless, like I said, it will get its own video. Now, for those who did play Pokemon Black and White, what comes next is very cool. In Driftvale City, we encounter the former Team Plasma members that were loyal to N, or ideologues, zealots, whatever you want to call them, who split off from what we know now as the current Team Plasma. This is done by showing an argument between a former Team Plasma grunt and a current Team Plasma grunt. The current Team Plasma grunt tells the old one to join the cause anyways, since everyone still sees him as a villain. When the ex-grunt makes an appeal to N, saying this is what N would want, we see the current grunt joke and mock N, calling him a traitor, which again, like earlier, shows how detached this current team is from the ideology. The ex-member takes you to a house in Driftvale which has Rood, one of the former 7 sages of Team Plasma, in it, and he challenges you to a battle. He says that this ex-Team Plasma group takes care of Pokemon that were lost or abandoned by their trainers. He says this is done to atone for the mistakes they've made in the past, and even goes on to say you can't begin to move on from things unless you admit fault and apologize, which I think that's a pretty good message to have in a kid's game, especially coming from a former evil bad guy, of course. Anthea and Concordia are there as well, and they recount the story about how N was groomed by Ghetsis to become the Philosopher King of Team Plasma and give Ghetsis the reins of power in Unova. What I like about this is it allows this game to touch on the very real and evil side of human nature through Ghetsis, through Colress, through Zinzolin, which we'll get into, but it also shows there is an opportunity for people to repent and to atone for the mistakes they've made as well. Colress challenges you at the Pokemon World Tournament to do some more research, and Hugh and Charon are there as well. It is here that we finally have our first big encounter with Team Plasma. We see a grunt run past us and Hugh chases after him, but Colress stops us. He tells us just because you have Pokemon doesn't mean you're invincible. It is here, though, he begins to ponder whether the bond of friendship between Pokemon and human can make the impossible possible. We find the very conspicuous pirate ship that was parked out in Castelia City here, and we board it. It is the Plasma Frigate. Now, the Plasma Frigate, I think, is one of the coolest sort of HQs we see in a Pokemon game, because instead of it just being like an underground layer or something, it is like, it is a moving HQ. It can go from place to place, and I think that's a very cool concept. Once we're on the ship, we're surrounded by a bunch of grunts, but alongside Hugh and Sharon, we take them down fairly easily. But there's something off about this ship. It's cold. And just like how in the cold storage in Pokemon Black and White, we found Zinzolin, here he is again to return as one of Team Plasma's leaders. He mentions how Team Plasma is going to use the legendary dragon again to achieve their goals. Now, with N missing, and obviously the player protagonist missing, something's going on. Why and how are they going to get this legendary dragon? He calls on the Shadow Triad to promptly remove you, and they give him some sass back, which I think is a pretty cool sort of character moment for the Shadow Triad, who really don't get a ton of screen time. Now, it's at this point of the game where you honestly forget that Team Plasma kind of exists, and this might be another parallel to Team Rocket and Johto, because there's a long stretch in that game as well where you kind of just don't run into them ever again. There's a small moment where you run into one of the Swords of Justice, and Rood tells you that they sort of chose you to help prevent some disaster from happening, but besides that, it's kind of barren here. However, it's not completely empty. I think there's a very cool moment in Chargestone Cave. If you remember in the first game, Chargestone Cave is where a big character moment happens for N, where he pushes back on Professor Juniper and tells her that Pokemon are his friends. They aren't meant to be researched on or filed into some sort of Pokédex. In Chargestone Cave, we hear someone talk about needing to save their friends, which parallels N in the first game talking about his friends, those being Pokemon. With the fast-scrolling text box, we can only assume this is N speaking. N, who we assumed to be completely absent up to this point, is now back. And he's not only back, he is aware of Team Plasma's plot. Now, besides this, you really just spend the next chunk of the game exploring the region, which in its own right is very cool. I love how this game really opened up Unova for you to explore, but it isn't until you get to Lacunosa Town where you encounter Team Plasma again. This is also the place where you first hear about Kyurem, another one of the legendary dragons. It is here we run into a grunt and Zinzolin, and it is here that he confides to you why he rejoined Team Plasma. Basically, he's just curious what humanity would look like with a part of its civilization gone, that being Pokeballs. He wants to see what humanity would do when they are forced to forsake this. Now, this is interesting because you'll see this contrasts a lot with the other leaders of Team Plasma and their motivations. Anyways, they're after the DNA splicers in Opalyscid City, which will be important later in the story. Just know that the DNA splicers are needed for their big plan, so let's get there. Before Team Plasma's plot in Opalyscid City, we learn about Kyurem from Drayden. He tells us that Kyurem is sort of the shell left over when, if you remember, the legendary dragon split into Kyurem, Zekrom, and Reshiram. But it isn't long before Team Plasma starts their offensive. They use the Plasma Frigate, and it's freaking awesome. They use it to freeze the entire city. Afterwards, they go and find the DNA splicers, but it's just really cool how, like, you see the whole map change. I think it's a very cool touch to these games. You find Zinzolin once more, and it is here where I really want to talk about Zinzolin's character and how interesting it is. There is a part of Zinzolin that pursues pain. There's a desire to feel uncomfortable. He says he chases this discomfort to feel alive. That's why, if you haven't noticed, Zinzolin spends almost every waking moment in both games in the cold, even though he constantly tells you how much he dislikes the cold. What we see Zinzolin embrace is a Nietzschean idea called the affirmation of life. It is that one must embrace the suffering alongside the pleasures of life as a whole of existence rather than rejecting it. Even in Pokemon Black and White, he says this: the experiences of joy and suffering are a vital part of being alive. Zinzolin on the surface may seem like another just basic villain they brought back to fill in the battles, which could be part of it, but his motivations go a lot deeper than one may first perceive. Again, he wants to see how the world would change under Team Plasma's rule, regardless the consequences, regardless good or bad. This sort of quasi-masochism that he has being in the cold, and this detachment from the world itself, civilization itself, shows a sort of nihilism, his yearning to embrace the suffering of life, up to and including aiding Team Plasma in their conquering of Unova, is a profoundly human reflection we can see in our own lives, where we may turn to dark and grim things to find purpose in life. When we can't find purpose, inherent purpose and meaning in our lives, like Zinzolin here, we may turn to meaningless suffering to try and find this purpose, regardless of how painful. But within the leadership of Team Plasma himself, he represents only one of the three features of the Dark Triad personalities. Here with Zinzolin's obsession with his own suffering and nihilism and philosophy to the point of causing the whole world to suffer under Team Plasma represents narcissism. The others, psychopathy and Machiavellianism, are represented in the other two. But we'll get there. That's why I'll say this game, while maybe on a plot level isn't as deep as Pokémon Black and White, on a character-driven level is maybe even more deep, as it truly explores the dark facets of human nature. Now, speaking of this sort of dark triad, let's move on to Colress, our next subject, who becomes more prevalent in these upcoming plot points. After a detour takes you to the 8th gym leader, you find yourself in Seaside Cave, where you make a Crustle move, and then finally you see the Plasma Frigate once more. In this frigate we see Kyurem, which we come to realize is the Pokemon which allowed Team Plasma to freeze Opalucid. Then finally we move on to the grand climax in the story, which happens in the Giant Chasm. We see a confrontation between the old Team Plasma and the new Team Plasma. Rood helps us fight them, and he gives us a sort of monologue about how his pride in his own philosophy and ideology, and even his loyalty to N, blinded him from the harm he would cause to others. Another great lesson we can learn. And for the last time, we board the Plasma Frigate to get up close and see how Kyurem is suffering in silence. Is it really the shell that Drayden said? We take down Zinzolin once more, and we find, leading Team Plasma, Colress. Here we see Colress's true self. A sort of amoral transhumanist. By transhumanist, I mean he seeks to unlock the full, maybe even godlike, potential of humanity and Pokemon through whatever means necessary. Then so be it, is his reoccurring line as he gives you his monologue. Whether his research proves that it's friendship and the bonds between humans and Pokemon that unlock their full power, or it's merciless control and dominion from Team Plasma that does it, so be it. Whether it destroys the world to get to that conclusion, then so be it. You and Team Plasma to Colress are two sides of the same coin, kind of a warring ideology of sorts. Does friendship prevail or dominion and ruthlessness? You battle him and Colress knows that one of you have to win. One of you have to budge, Team Plasma or you. And it is from there that he will draw a conclusion about how we reach this transhuman peak. Now, some may think that Colress's amoral position is somehow respectable or admirable. However, I disagree. I find his utter disregard for morality even more horrifying than what we find from Ghetsis later on. It is after this we finally get to see the mastermind behind the operation, Ghetsis, once more. He plans to use the power of Kyurem to freeze all of Unova and force it to submission. He believes that Kyurem is an empty vessel, it truly is a shell, and it is his desires he must pour into it to carry out its purpose. This is obviously a complete and total inversion of what Team Plasma was supposed to stand for in the first games. That Pokemon had inherent value, that they must be liberated. Now, it is nothing more than a shell to be used to carry out human goals. The need for this ruler, Ghetsis, to be loved by Unova is gone. Now he knows there's nothing but a need to be feared to control this region. We move to the inside of the Giant Chasm, and it is here we see Ghetsis' plan come to fruition. He alludes that the look you're giving him reminds him of what we can only assume to be the protagonist of the first games, and so he attempts to murder you with Chiron. He uses Glaciate, and it looks very similar to the summoned swords in Devil May Cry, which is kind of dope. And it's all but over for you. But you are rescued by the former member of Team Plasma, the one Ghetsis calls the freak of nature without a human heart, Lord N. He takes a very deep and personal stand against Ghetsis, coming out of his heart. And even in that moment, Ghetsis, out of pure evil, still manages to take credit for it. He says it's his education he gave to N that allows him to speak this way. He then, in a very cruel and heartless manner, tries to manipulate N once more emotionally by appealing to him taking him in as an orphan. And tragically, it's revealed that this was all a setup, that he needed N to come here to bring Reshiram to Chiron and to use the DNA splicers. Even in a moment where we had thought that N had broken from the shackles of his father, he was still used like a tool. Very tragic. He merges Chiron in Reshiram, and we must take down this fusion before it destroys Unova. You take it down, of course, but Ghetsis, like in the first game, decides to take manners into his own hands and tries to take you out himself. And his theme song here is just as horrifying as his in the first game, but there's more of a frantic nature to it. After this strenuous battle, even in defeat, Ghetsis' hubris is still there. He even claims to be perfect. How could he fail? N tries to reach out to him as his son, but all Ghetsis can say in return is to shut up, to stop talking. Even in this moment of vulnerability, Ghetsis' evil just cannot be broken through. But it's over. Team Plasma, Ghetsis, Zinzolin, Colress are taken down for good, and Unova can finally be at rest for another time. Now, like I said in the intro, these videos don't just serve as, deep dives of these villainous teams. They're also reviews of these villainous teams. This is where I rank these teams on a scale of bad, mid, great, and excellent on 4 different metrics. These being their motive, their overall villainy, the plot, and their aura, which I'll get into a little bit later. First, motive. Does this team have a compelling motive for the things they carry out? Furthermore, does their motivations match the scale of the villainy they commit? For Team Plasma and Pokémon Black and White 2, I give them an excellent score for motive. I think that from the Grunts to Colress to Ghetsis to Zinzolin, everyone on this team has a compelling reason to be here. And like I said earlier, it coincides with the dark parts of humanity that compels us to do these things. Zinzolin's nihilistic and narcissistic drive to see his philosophy come to fruition. Colress has his psychopathic and apathetic view of morality, where he rejects it entirely and sees there can be no wrong in the pursuit of truth. And of course, Ghetsis, the Machiavellian ruler, who seeks dominion at all costs. What was left of the Grunts in Team Plasma were opportunists. These petty crimes we see in the beginning make sense because all that's left on this team, in the absence of the ideologues, are just thugs. You could tell that unlike Team Plasma in the first game, these Grunts weren't duped into doing anything bad that they were doing. They were doing it willfully for their own gain. There was no ideology to appeal to for any of these men. There was no king that they had to be loyal to. It was all just a group of men and women looking for their own glory, their own knowledge, and their own power, in their own ways, just vaguely unified under this shell of the former team. Moving on to our next metric, that is villainy. It's pretty self-explanatory how villainous are the actions of these teams. And for this team, I give them an excellent score for villainy as well. Every part of this team just exudes villainy. Let's start at the top. We've got Ghetsis. Ghetsis might just be the most evil man in the entire series, and I mean that with no sense of irony. This dude is pure evil. But even in the absence of the context of the first games, where he manipulates a child from a very young age to become a tool in his quasi-kingdom, we see that he's nothing but evil. He resorts to pure terrorism to achieve his goals. He employs a psychopathic scientist to unlock the power of Kyurem to freeze the entire region. In fact, he does use the ice cannon to freeze an entire city already. He actually did that. Oh, and let's not forget, just as he didn't hesitate to kill the protagonist in the first game, he did not even flinch at the thought of killing you, an innocent child, this time around. That's what's crazy, is at least in the first game it was personal. You thwarted his kingdom, you convinced his son that he wasn't his pawn. In this game, he just really met you. He just met you. He didn't care. He was gonna kill you anyways. Moving on to Colress, there's something just as off-putting about his pursuit for knowledge and the utter lack of care for morality in doing so. While he's not necessarily outright evil, Colress has a level of apathy that is just so psychopathic, you can't ignore it. It's not like he was unaware of the criminality of Team Plasma or how bad or evil they were. He just didn't care. And Zinzolin aids in all of these evil things through his lens of narcissism and philosophy. Very detached from humanity. And of course, the grunts. They do evil things. They're opportunists. They're criminals. They don't care. Now, our next metric is plot. It's not just about, the plot, overall arching plot of the game or the characters, which I think was well. It's also about the pacing. I think this is the one spot where Pokémon Black and White 2 do see a step down from than the first game's Pokémon Black and White. But regardless, they still get a great score from me, because really the only downside was the pacing. Unlike Pokémon Black and White, where the story spans from before the first gym to the championship battle in the Elite Four, this game goes back to the very conventional, wrap everything up before the Elite Four type of deal. Further, they got a lot less prevalent in the mid-game, similar to, let's say, Team Rocket and Johto, when compared to Black and White, where they were a consistent presence in the entire game. I found myself wishing I ran into them more often, especially with how interesting the characters of Zinzolin, Colress, and Ghetsis were. I just wish we got more of that. Now, moving on, let's talk about the characters. I've only gushed about them the entire video. This is where Pokemon Black and White 2 step out above and beyond every other villainous team. Zinzolin especially is a clear sort of ideological step forward from his previous character in Pokemon Black and White, and we've gone on enough about him, so we'll leave it at that. You've also got the Shadow Triad, which are like these aura farming ninja boys. We love them. They're diehard loyalists to Ghetsis, which is cool. You gotta have that. And Colress, even with minimal interactions, is just such an interesting character. And another interesting part about Colress is he plays a sort of foil to N in the first game. While N was passionately pushing his morals and his ideology, Colress coldly rejected any kind of morality in his pursuit of knowledge. N defined himself by his ethics, by his love for Pokemon, while Colress disregards ethics entirely. N initially ignored the bonds that were found between Pokemon and human, trying to sever them. Colress, on the other hand, tried to manipulate them to achieve max potential. And Ghetsis is still Ghetsis, just as manipulative and evil as last time, if not even more so. But again, if there's something I want you to take away from this villainous team, it's that these three main characters, Zinzolin, Colress, and Ghetsis, truly show a dark side of humanity that needs to be explored. They touch on ideas of nihilism, Machiavellianism, transhumanism that I think you should research more into. Further, the fact that these three completely unique and not ideologically aligned people, they have very different ideas of what's right, what's wrong, if there is right or wrong. They were unified and fighting under one banner, which is more alike the real world than you think. Regardless, the rest of the plot itself is okay. It's more traditional for a Pokemon team, and I have no problem with that. My favorite part, of course, is that this team is what I believe Team Rocket and Johto was supposed to be. They felt like a cornered animal. When you lose your king, like how Team Rocket lost Giovanni, when you lose N, you lean into the terrorism, you lean into the evil, like what Team Rocket did in Slowpoke Well. This team had nothing to lose, and we got what is expected of that. Someone who has nothing to lose is dangerous. It's unpredictable. They become a feral animal of sorts. It reflects part of human nature again, which is that without this order, there comes chaos, there comes brutality. And so if it weren't for the pacing being pretty bad, you could see why I would give Pokemon Black and White 2 such a high score for their Team Plasma. Anyways, moving on to our last metric, which is Aura, and it is also pretty self-explanatory for those who know what like Aura is, but for those who are uninitiated, this is basically just my opinion on the cool factor of this team. How they dress, how they carry themselves, their dialogue, just all of that. How cool are they? And of course, I think they're going to get an excellent score. I mean, let's just start with the grunts. Look at them. While they tried to portray themselves as angels of light in the first, now they're pirates, showing their utter disregard for morals, ethics, anything good. The Shadow Triad looks dope as usual, and Zinzolin's wearing this sort of winterized sort of Team Plasma getup, which I think is cool. It sort of reflects his Nietzschean, affirmation of life, his philosophy in that way, because he's always in the cold. Colress, of course, always aura farming. He looks dope, and Ghetsis now completely wearing black because he's past the trying to be good. He's past the part of Machiavellianism where you try to be loved by the people. Now he's just completely embraced that I'm going to be the feared one, and that's how it's going to be. And let's talk about their headquarters. The Plasma Frigate, let's be honest, that's like the coolest headquarters in the entire series. It's a flying pirate ship, okay? It's like Treasure Planet. Okay, this is freaking awesome. Overall, Team Plasma makes an awesome comeback for a second time. And while I think it might have highs that are higher than the first Team Plasma, I think overall it wasn't as good. But they still do great in their own regard. What makes this team stand out isn't just their villainy. It is also how each of the leaders of this team represent a dark side of human nature. That's why even though it's a Pokemon game, I think these villains stand out and stand on their own as just great villains. So, what's the score I give this villainous team on my villainous teams tier list? Well, I give them an A ranking, right above Team Rocket. Yes, I think both Team Plasmas carry out a more compelling and a better villainous story than Team Rocket and Kanto, which I think is a brilliant villainous team. This is really nothing against Team Rocket. I think that's the perfect, of course, I call it the blueprint in my first video. I think they're great. This just goes to show how brilliantly written Team Plasma was in both of these games. Next time, we'll take a deep dive into the last conventional evil team of Pokemon. A villainous team known for their fashion sense as well as their genocidal tendencies. Stay tuned. Anyways, that will do it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video on Team Plasma and Pokemon Black and White 2. I'm sorry this video took so long to come out. I was just really trying to get this one right, and I kept, when you're script writing and you're like, I want it to be perfect, but at this point I just wanted to get it out because all these ideas, they aren't any good if I don't get them to paper. But if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up down below, and don't forget to comment your thoughts on not only the video itself, but Team Plasma and Pokemon Black and White 2. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with all the Pokemon fans in your life. I know you know at least one. But again, that'll do it for me. I'm Flyboy, and until next time, peace.